from Levity Storytelling. How are you doing today? We are going to be reading a story. But first up, we are going to be reading the Bible. Then we are going to be doing the synopsis with Kim. Then we're going to be doing Ben-Hur, the last 2 chapters. So, this is going to be epic. And I don't know what the next book's, well, I do know what the next book's going to be, but I hope you guys enjoy this video.
Hey, no, it's not actually a surprise. We're going to read Dragon Drums. All right,
Yeah.
so, hi. Guten Tag. Guten Tag. All right. So, as usual, I'm going to read from the English Standard Version of the Bible. We're on Hebrews chapter 11. I don't want to break up our Hebrews, and here we go. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Let me say that again. Thank you to people for being here, by the way. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. By faith Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts. And through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. By faith Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found because God had taken him. Now before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God, and without faith it is impossible to please him, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who seek him. By faith Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants, as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it is said, "Through Isaac shall your offspring be named." He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. By faith Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. By faith Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. By faith Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites, and gave directions concerning his bones. By faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. By faith the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered, mocked and flogged, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, and they were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect. That is the end of chapter 11. I hope you're enjoying the reading of the book of Hebrews. I will say, just real quickly, one of the reasons why I picked Hebrews right after Judges is because of this chapter, and it talks about a lot of the people that are in the book of Judges. And I just lost the page, so I can't even tell you who they are. But the one that sawn in two, I believe that is it's one of the prophets, and there is a Jewish legend that says, I want to say Ezekiel, but I'm not 100% sure. It's one of the prophets, and the Jews have a legend that is actually that person, and that is definitely what he's referring to, is the Jewish legend of that, which was probably true. So anyway, without further ado, we have Kimberly here, who is going to give us a very special synopsis of the reading from the other day. What day was it? Tuesday, I think it was Tuesday. So here's Kimberly. Yay. Go ahead.
So, well, yesterday during, not yesterday, 2 days ago, sorry. 2 days ago, there was an epic breakup scene, which honestly was a lot like the breakup scene at the beginning, where Ben-Hur and Masala weren't friends anymore. So, then...
How was it like that scene?
Well,
What was Iris doing?
Iris was making fun of his religion, just like Masala was. And she was making fun of Jesus, too. So there was a lot of stuff there.
And what had Ben-Hur been doing for the
Ben-Hur,
last 3 years?
he'd been raising an army.
No.
He did that
He
at
was,
one
okay,
point.
he was raising an army, but what was he doing that making fun of Jesus would offend him?
He was shadowing Jesus, waiting for him to basically be like, I'm the king of everything now. And then what happened was, what happened after that was they broke up, and he went over to Esther, and he realized, I actually kind of like Esther, and she's definitely, that would be a much better relationship. So you kind of realize that. And then what happened after that was he with like an army, I think. Was there an army there too? Or was it just him?
He had an army, but did they come out and attack the guards?
No, I didn't say where they were yet.
I'm sorry.
So they were at the Garden of Gethsemane, and they, what happened was they watched Jesus be betrayed and taken prisoner, and they did nothing. And I actually have my Bible here. Oops. Sorry, I had a bookmark on the page that I was on. I have my Bible here. It is a very nice Bible. It's from my last church. The pastor, he gave it to me one day.
The youth pastor.
Yeah, the youth pastor. He was very nice.
What was the youth pastor's name?
Tim.
Okay.
Hey, Chrissy.
Okay.
You can't see her, but she's right here.
So you have to tell us what passage you're going to read.
I'm going to read 38 to...
No.
36, sorry, to...
You have to say the book.
Matthew chapter 26, verse 36 through 40-something?
Through 56.
Oh, 56. Okay. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little further, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "So you could not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass until I drink it, your will be done." And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the 3rd time, saying the same words again. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Sleep and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." Betrayal and arrest of Jesus. My Bible, it has these captions above some of the paragraphs. While he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd with swords and clubs, from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man, seize him." And he came up to Jesus at once and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and he kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, what do you come to do?" Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scriptures be fulfilled, that it must be so?" And that in that hour Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But all this has taken place, that the scripture of the prophets the scripture of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples left him and fled. And that is verses 36 through 56.
So why are we reading this? Because it is what took place in the last chapter, right?
Yeah, this is what happened in the last chapter, and from this point on in Ben-Hur, it's basically the Bible. It's basically what's happening in the Bible and everything. Yeah.
Right. Told in a historical fiction context, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay.
In a new perspective.
So,
Look, I'm still reading on my phone.
which actually brings up a very interesting point, because I don't remember which Facebook group it was that I was watching, and somebody, I think it was like a Christian writers group, and they said, why do so many people read fiction when they need to read nonfiction? And I think that there's a mentality there where maybe, people can only find truth in nonfiction, but I think that that's not true, because I think that we've discovered a lot of truth in this book. And in the next 2 chapters, maybe we'll find something new. So, if this book has been valuable to you, please like and share it. Share the YouTube playlist, not just this one video, but share the playlist. If this video is valuable to you, I challenge you to do that. All right, so we're going to read, beginning with chapter 9, the going to Calvary. That is Calvary, the hillside in Judea, not cavalry, mounted soldiers. There's a big difference, and apparently cavalry officers more often than not call themselves cavalry officers. I'm just saying. All right. Because I've heard a lot of speeches from cavalry officers. And I don't think they're from Judea. But anyway. All right, so here we are, chapter 9. Enough making fun of the army. Here we go. The going to Calvary. Next morning, about the 2nd hour, 2 men rode full speed to the doors of Ben-Hur's tents, and, dismounting, asked to see him. He was not yet risen, but gave directions for their admission. "Peace to you, brethren," he said, for they were of his Galileans and trusted officers. "Will you be seated?" "Nay," the senior replied bluntly. "To sit and be at ease is to let the Nazarene die. Rise, son of Judah, and go with us. The judgment has been given. The tree of the cross is already at Golgotha." Ben-Hur stared at him. The cross was all he could for the moment. Say. Put the verb at the end of the sentence for some reason. I don't know why. "They took him last night and tried him," the man continued. "At dawn they led him before Pilate. Twice the Roman denied his guilt. Twice he refused to give him over. At last he washed his hands and said, 'Be it upon you then,' and they answered." And I would remind everybody right now that I do have that, if anybody wants to read that paper that I wrote, it is 20 pages, and I will share it with anybody who sends me a message and asks for it. At last he washed his hands and said, "Be it upon you then," and they answered. Who answered? They, the priests and people. "His blood be upon us and our children." "Holy father of Abraham," cried Ben-Hur, "a Roman kinder to an Israelite than his own kind." Roman kinder. Sorry. I'm reading German now, kinder. A Roman... Okay. All right. "A Roman kinder to an Israelite than his own kin, and if he should indeed be the Son of God, what shall ever wash his blood from their children? It must not be. 'Tis time to fight." His face brightened with resolution, and he clapped his hands. "The horses, and quickly," he said to the Arab who answered the signal, "and bid Amra send me fresh garments, and bring my sword. It is time to die for Israel, my friends. Tarry without till I come." He ate a crust, drank a cup of wine, and was soon upon the road. "Whither would you go first?" asked the Galilean. "To collect the legions." "Alas," the man replied, throwing up his hands. "Why, alas?" "Master," the man spoke with shame, "Master, I and my friend here are all that are faithful. The rest do follow the priest." "Seeking what?" asked Ben-Hur, and Ben-Hur drew rein. "To kill him, not the Nazarene. You have said it." Ben-Hur looked slowly from one man to the other. He was hearing again the question of the night before. "The cup of my father hath given me. Shall I not drink it?" In the ear of the Nazarene he was putting his own question. "If I bring thee rescue, wilt thou accept it?" He was saying to himself, "This death may not be averted. The man has been traveling towards it with full knowledge from the day he began his mission. It is imposed by a will higher than his. Whose but the Lord's? If he is consenting, if he goes to it voluntarily, what shall another do?" Nor less did Ben-Hur see the failure of the scheme he had built upon the fidelity of the Galileans. Their desertion, in fact, left nothing more of it. But how singular it should happen that morning of all others! A dread seized him. It was possible his scheming and labor and expenditure of treasure might have been but blasphemous contention with God. When he picked up the reins and said, "Let us go, brethren," all before him was uncertainty, the faculty of resolving quickly, without which one cannot be a hero in the midst of stirring scenes, was numb within him. "Let us go, brethren. Let us to Golgotha." They passed through excited crowds of people going south like themselves. All the country north of the city seemed aroused and in motion. Hearing that the procession with the condemned might be met with somewhere near the great white towers left by Herod, the three friends rode thither, passing round southeast of Acre. In the valley below the pool of Hezekiah, passageway against the multitude became impossible, and they... Kimberly, are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay. In the valley below the pool of Hezekiah, passageway against the multitude became impossible, and they were compelled to dismount and take shelter behind the corner of a house and wait. The waiting was as if they were on a riverbank watching a flood go by, for such the people seemed. There are certain chapters in the first book of this story which were written to give the reader an idea of the composition of the Jewish nationality as it was in the time of Christ. They were also written in anticipation of this hour and scene, so that he who has read them with attention can now see all Ben-Hur saw of the going to the crucifixion, a rare and wonderful sight. Half an hour, the flood surged by Ben-Hur and his companions within arm's reach, incessant, undiminished. At the end of that time he could have said, "I have seen all the castes of Jerusalem, all the sects of Judea, all the tribes of Israel, and all the nationalities of earth represented by them." The Libyan Jew went by, and the Jew of Egypt, and the Jew from the Rhine, in short, Jews from all east countries, and all west countries, and all islands within commercial connection. They went by on foot, on horseback, on camels, in litters and chariots, and with infinite variety of costumes, yet with the same marvelous similitude of features which today peculiarizes the children of Israel, tried as they have been by climates and modes of life. They went by speaking all known tongues, for by that means only were they distinguishable group from group. They went by in haste, eager, anxious, crowding, all to behold one poor Nazarene die, a felon between felons. These were the many, but they were not the all. Borne along with the stream were thousands, not Jews, thousands hating and despising them, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Syrians, Africans, Egyptians, Easterns, so that, studying the mass, it seemed the whole world was to be represented, and in that sense present at the crucifixion. The going was singularly quiet. A hoof stroke upon a rock, the glide and rattle of revolving wheels, voices in conversation, and now and then a calling voice were all the sounds heard above the rustle of the mighty movement. Yet was there upon every countenance the look with which men make haste to see some dreadful sight, some sudden wreck or ruin or calamity of war, and by such signs Ben-Hur judged that these were the strangers in the city come up to the Passover, who had had no part in the trial of the Nazarene, and might be his friends. At length, from the direction of the great towers, Ben-Hur heard, at first faint in the distance, a shouting of many men. "Hark! They are coming now," said one of his friends. The people in the street halted to hear, but as the cry rang on over their heads, they looked at each other and in shuddering silence moved along. The shouting drew nearer each moment, and the air was already full of it and trembling, when Ben-Hur saw the servants of Simonides coming with their master in his chair, and Esther walking by his side. A covered litter was next behind them. "Peace to you, O Simonides, and to you, Esther," said Ben-Hur, meeting them. "If you are for Golgotha, stay until the procession passes. I will then go with you. There is room to turn in by the house here." The merchant's large head rested heavily upon his breast. Rousing himself, he answered, "Speak to Balthazar. His pleasure will be mine. He is in the litter." Ben-Hur hastened to draw aside the curtain. The Egyptian was lying within, his wan face so pinched as to appear like a dead man's. The proposal was submitted to him. "Can we see him?" he inquired faintly. "The Nazarene? Yes. He must pass within a few feet of us." "Dear Lord," the old man cried fervently, once more, oh, it is a dreadful day for the world." Shortly the whole party were in waiting under the shelter of the house. They said but little, afraid probably to trust their thoughts to each other. Everything was uncertain, and nothing so much so as opinions. Balthazar drew himself feebly from the litter, and stood supported by a servant. Esther and Ben-Hur kept Simonides company. Meantime the flood poured along, if anything, more densely than before, and the shouting came nearer, shrill up in the air, hoarse along the earth, and cruel. At last the procession was up. "See," said Ben-Hur bitterly, "that which cometh now is Jerusalem." The advance was in possession of an army of boys, hooting and screaming, "The King of the Jews! Room for the King of the Jews!" Simonides watched them as they whirled and danced along like a cloud of summer insects, and said gravely, "When these come to their inheritance, son of Hur—" Oh, sorry, it's Simonides. "When these come to their inheritance, son of Hur, alas for the city of Solomon." A band of legionaries, fully armed, followed next, marching in sturdy indifference, the glory of burnished brass about them the while. Then came the Nazarene. He was nearly dead. Every few steps he staggered as if he would fall. A stained gown, badly torn, hung from his shoulders over a seamless undertunic. His bare feet left red splotches upon the stones. An inscription on a board was tied to his neck. A crown of thorns had been crushed hard down upon his head, making cruel wounds from which streams of blood, now dry and blackened, had run over his face and neck. The long hair, tangled in the thorns, was clotted thick. The skin, where it could be seen, was ghastly white. His hands were tied before him. Back somewhere in the city he had fallen, exhausted under the transverse beam of his cross, which, as a condemned person, custom required him to bear to the place of execution. Now a countryman carried the burden in his stead. 4 soldiers went with him as a guard against the mob, who sometimes nevertheless broke through and struck him with sticks and spit upon him. Yet no sound escaped him, neither remonstrance nor groan, nor did he look up until he was nearly in front of the house sheltering Ben-Hur and his friends, all of whom were moved with quick compassion. Esther clung to her father, and he, strong of will as he was, trembled. Balthazar fell down speechless. Even Ben-Hur cried out, "O my God, O my God!" Then, as if he divined their feelings or heard the exclamation, the Nazarene turned his wan face toward the party and looked at them each one, so that they carried the look in memory through life. They could see he was thinking of them, not himself, and the dying eyes gave them the blessing he was not permitted to speak. "Where are the legions, son of Hur?" asked Simonides, aroused. "Hannes can tell thee better than I." "What? Faithless? All but these 2. Then all is lost, and this good man must die." The face of the merchant knit convulsively as he spoke, and his head sank upon his breast. He had borne his party in Ben-Hur's labors well, and he had been inspired by the same hopes, now blown out, never to be rekindled. 2 other men succeeded the Nazarene, bearing crossbeams. "Who are these?" Ben-Hur asked of the Galileans. "Thieves, appointed to die with the Nazarene," they replied. Next in the procession stalked a mitred figure, clad all in the golden vestments of the high priest. Policemen from the temple curtained him round about, and after him in order strode the Sanhedrin and a long array of priests, the latter in their plain white garments overwrapped by abnets of many folds and gorgeous colors. "The son-in-law of Hannes," said Ben-Hur in a low voice. "Caiaphas, I have seen him," Simonides replied, adding after a pause during which he thoughtfully watched the haughty pontiff, "and now I am convinced, with such assurance as proceeds from clear enlightenment of the Spirit, with absolute assurance, now know I that he who first goes yonder with the inscription about his neck is what the inscription proclaims him, King of the Jews. A common man, an impostor, a felon, was never thus waited upon. For look, here are the nations, Jerusalem, Israel. Here is the ephod, here the blue robe with its fringe, and purple pomegranates, and the golden bells, not seen in the street since the day Jaddua went out to meet the Macedonian. Proofs all that this Nazarene is dead. Would I could rise and go after him." Ben-Hur listened, surprised, and directly, as if himself awakened to his unusual display of feeling, Simonides said impatiently, "Speak to Balthazar, I pray you, and let us be gone. The vomit of Jerusalem is coming." Then Esther spoke. "I see some women there, and they are weeping. Who are they?" Following the point of her head, the party beheld 4 women in tears. One of them leaned upon the arm of a man of aspect not unlike the Nazarenes. Presently Ben-Hur answered, "The man is the disciple whom the Nazarene loves the best of all. She who leans upon his arm is Mary, the Master's mother. The others are friendly women of Galilee." Esther pursued the mourners with glistening eyes until the multitude received them out of sight. It may be the reader will fancy the foregoing snatches of conversation were had in quiet, but it was not so. The talking was, for the most part, like that indulged by people at the seaside under the sound of the surf, for to nothing else can the clamor of this division of the mob be so well likened. Bless you. The demonstration was the forerunner of those in which, scarce 30 years later, under the rule of the factions, the holy city was torn to pieces. It was quite as great in numbers, as fanatical and bloodthirsty, boiled and raved, and had in it exactly the same elements: servants, camel drivers, marketmen, gatekeepers, gardeners, dealers in fruits and wines, proselytes, and foreigners not proselytes, watchmen and menials from the temple, thieves, robbers, and the myriad not assignable to any class, but who, on such occasions as this, appeared no one could say whence, hungry and smelling of caves and old tombs, bare-headed wretches with naked arms and legs, hair and beard in uncombed mats, and each one with garment the color of clay, beasts with abysmal mouths in outcry effective as lions calling each other across desert spaces. Some of them had swords, a greater number flourished spears and javelins, though the weapons of the many were staves and knotted clubs and slings, for which latter selected stones were stored in scrips, and sometimes in sacks improvised from the foreskirts of their dirty tunics. Among the mass here and there appeared persons of high degree, scribes, elders, rabbis, Pharisees with broad fringing, Sadducees in fine cloaks, serving for the time as prompters and directors. If a throat tired of one cry, they invented another for it. If brassy lungs showed signs of collapse, they set them going again, and yet the clamor, loud and continuous as it was, could have been reduced to a few syllables. King of the Jews! Room for King of the Jews! Defiler of the temple! Blasphemer of God! Crucify him! Crucify him! And of these cries, the last one seemed the greatest in favor, because, doubtless, it was more directly expressive of the wish of the mob, and helped to better articulate its hatred of the Nazarene. Come, said Simonides, when Balthasar was ready to proceed. Come, let us forward. Ben-Hur did not hear the call. The appearance of the part of the procession then passing, its brutality and hunger for life were reminding him of the Nazarene, his gentleness, and the many charities he had seen him do for suffering men. Suggestions beget suggestions, so he remembered suddenly his own great indebtedness to the man, the time he himself was in the hands of a Roman guard going, as he was supposed, to a death as certain and almost as terrible as this one of the cross, the cooling drink he had had at the well by Nazareth, and the divine expression of the face of him who gave it, the later goodness, the miracle of Palm Sunday. And with these recollections, the thought of his present powerlessness to give back help for him, or make return in kind stung him keenly, and he accused himself. He had not done all he might. He could have watched with the Galileans, and kept them true and ready. And this was the moment to strike. A blow well given now would not merely disperse the mob and set the Nazarene free. It would be a trumpet call to Israel and precipitate the long-dreamt-of war for freedom. The opportunity was going. The minutes were bearing it away, and if lost, God of Abraham, was there nothing to be done? Nothing? That instant a party of Galileans caught his eye. He rushed through the press and overtook them. "Follow me," he said. "I would have speech with you." The men obeyed him, and when they were under shelter of the house, he spoke again. "You are of those who took my swords and agreed with me to strike for freedom and the king who was coming. You have the swords now, and now is the time to strike with them. Go, look everywhere, and find our brethren, and tell them to meet me at the tree of the cross, making ready for the Nazarene. Haste, all of you. Nay, stand not so. The Nazarene is the king, and freedom dies with him." They looked at him respectfully, but did not move. "Hear you?" he asked. Then one of them replied, "Son of Judah." By that name they knew him. "Son of Judah, it is you who are deceived, not we or our brethren who have your swords. The Nazarene is not the king, neither has he the spirit of a king. We were with him when he came into Jerusalem. We saw him in the temple. He failed himself and us and Israel. At the gate beautiful he turned his back upon God and refused the throne of David. He is not the king, and Galilee is not with him. He shall die the death. But hear you, son of Judah, we have your swords, and we are ready now to draw them and strike for freedom, and we will meet you at the tree of the cross." The sovereign moment of his life was upon Ben-Hur. Could he have taken the offer and said the word, history might have been other than it is. But then it would have been history ordered by men, not by God. Something that never was and never will be. A confusion fell upon him, he knew not how, though afterward he attributed it to the Nazarene. For when the Nazarene was risen, he understood that death was necessary to faith in the resurrection, without which Christianity would be an empty husk. The confusion, as has been said, left him without the faculty of decision. He stood helpless, wordless even, covering his face with his hand, or also his faith with his hand. He shook with the conflict between his wish, which was what he would have ordered, and the power that was upon him. "Come, we are waiting for you," said Simonides, and the fourth time. Thereupon he walked mechanically after the chair and the litter. Esther walked with him. Like Balthasar and his friends, the wise men, the day they went to the meeting in the desert, he was being led along the way. Chapter 10, the Crucifixion. When the party, Balthasar, Simonides, Ben-Hur, Esther, and the two faithful Galileans, reached the place of crucifixion, Ben-Hur was in advance, leading them. How they had been able to make way through the great press of excited people, he never knew. No more did he know the road by which they came, or the time it took them to come. He had walked in total unconsciousness, neither hearing nor seeing anybody or anything, and without a thought of where he was going, or the ghostliest semblance of a purpose of his mind. In such condition, a little child could have done as much as he to prevent the awful crime he was about to witness. The intentions of God are always strange to us, but not more so than the means by which they are wrought out, and at last made plain to our belief. Ben-Hur came to a stop. Those following him also stopped. As a curtain rises before an audience, the spell holding him in its sleep awake rose, and he saw with a clear understanding. There was a space upon the top of the low knoll, rounded like a skull, and a dry, dusty, and without vegetation, except some scrubby hyssop. The boundary of the space was a living wall of men, with men behind struggling, some to look over, others to look through it. An inner wall of Roman soldiery held the dense outer wall rigidly to its place. A centurion kept eye upon the soldiers, upon to the very line so vigilantly guarded Ben-Hur had been led. At the line he now stood, his face to the northwest. The knoll was the old Aramaic Golgotha, in Latin Calvaria, anglicized Calvary, translated the skull. Okay. On its slopes, in the low places, on the swells and higher hills, the earth sparkled with a strange enameling. Look where he would outside the walled space. He saw no patch of brown soil, no rock, no green thing. He saw only thousands of eyes in ruddy faces. Off a little way in the perspective only, ruddy faces without eyes. Off a little farther, only a broad circle, which the nearer view instructed him was also of faces. And this was the ensemble of 3 millions of people. Under it, 3 millions of hearts throbbing with passionate interest in what was taking place upon the knoll, indifferent as to the thieves, caring only for the Nazarene, and for him only, as he was an object of hate or fear or curiosity, he who loved them all and was about to die for them all. In the spectacle of a great assemblage of people, there are always the bewilderment and fascination one feels while looking over a stretch of sea in agitation, and never had this one been exceeded. Yet Ben-Hur gave it but a passing glance, for that which was going on in the space described would permit no division of his interest. Upon the knolls, so high as to be above the living wall, and visible over the heads of an attending company of notables, conspicuous because of his mitra and vestments and his haughty air, stood the high priest. Up the knolls, still higher, up quite to the round summit, so as to be seen far and near, was the Nazarene, stooped and suffering, but silent. The wit among the guard had complimented the crowd upon his head by putting a reed in his hand for a scepter. Clamors blew upon him like blasts, laughter, execrations, sometimes both together indistinguishably. A man, only a man, O reader, would have charged the blasts with the remainder of his love for the race, and let it go forever. All the eyes then looking were fixed upon the Nazarene. It may have been pity with which he was moved. Whatever the cause, Ben-Hur was conscious of a change in his feelings, a conception of something better than the best of this life, something so much better that it could serve a weak man with strength to endure agonies of spirit as well as of body, sometimes to make death welcome, perhaps Perhaps another life purer than this one, perhaps the spirit life which Balthazar held to so fast, began to dawn upon his mind clearer and clearer, bringing to him a certain sense that, after all, the mission of the Nazarene was that of guide across the boundary for such as loved him, across the boundary to where his kingdom was set up and waiting for him. Then, as something borne through the air out of the almost forgotten, he heard again, or seemed to hear, the saying of the Nazarene, "I am the resurrection and the life." And the words repeated themselves over and over, and took form, and the dawn touched them with its light, and filled them with a new meaning. And as men repeat a question to grasp and fix the meaning, he asked, gazing at the figure on the hill, fainting under its crown, "Who the resurrection, and who the life?" "I am," the figure seemed to say, and say it for him, for instantly he was sensible of a peace such as he had never known. The peace which is the end of doubt and mystery, and the beginning of faith and love and clear understanding. From this dreamy state Ben-Hur was aroused by the sound of hammering. On the summit of the knoll he observed then what had escaped him before, some soldiers and workmen preparing the crosses. The holes for planting the trees were ready, and now the transverse beams were being fitted to their places. Bid the men take haste," said the high priest to the centurion. "These," and he pointed to the Nazarene, "must be dead by the going down of the sun, and buried, that the land may not be defiled. Such is the law." With a better mind, a soldier went to the Nazarene and offered him something to drink, but he refused the cup. Then another went to him and took from his neck the board with the inscription upon it, which he nailed to the tree of the cross, and the preparation was complete. "The crosses are ready," said the centurion to the pontiff, who received the report with the wave of the hand and the reply, "Let the blasphemer go first. The Son of God should be able to save himself. We will see." The people to whom the preparation in its several stages was visible, and who to this time had assailed the hill with incessant cries of impatience, permitted a lull which directly became universal hush. The part of the infliction most shocking, at least to the thought, was reached. The men were to be nailed to their crosses. When for that purpose the soldiers laid their hands upon the Nazarene first, a shudder passed through the great concourse. The most brutalized shrank with dread. Afterward there were those who said the air suddenly chilled and made them shiver. "How very still it is," Esther said, as she put her arm about her father's neck. And remembering the torture he himself had suffered, he drew her face down upon his breast and sat trembling. "Avoid it, Esther, avoid it," he said. "I know not by all who stand and see it, the innocent as well as the guilty may be cursed from this hour." Balthasar sank upon his knees. "Son of her," said Simonides with increasing excitement, "son of her, if Jehovah stretch not forth his hand, and quickly Israel is lost, and we are all lost." Ben-Hur answered calmly, "I have been in a dream, Simonides, and heard in it why all this should be, and why it should go on. It is the will of the Nazarene. It is God's will. Let us do as the Egyptian here. Let us hold our peace and pray." As he looked up on the knolls again, the words were wafted to him through the awful stillness, "I am the resurrection and the life." He bowed reverently as to a person speaking. Upon the summit, meantime, the work went on. The guard took the Nazarene's clothes from him, so that he stood before the millions naked. The stripes of the scourging he had received in the early morning were still bloody upon his back, yet he was laid piteously down and stretched upon the cross. First, the arms upon the transverse beam. The spikes were sharp. A few blows, and they were driven through the tender palms. Next, they drew his knees up until the soles of his feet rested flat upon the tree. Then they placed one foot upon the other, and one spike fixed both of them fast. The dulled sound of the hammering was heard outside the guarded space, and such as could not hear, yet saw the hammer as it fell, shivered with fear. And withal not a groan or a cry or a word of remonstrance from the sufferer. Nothing at which an enemy could laugh, nothing a lover could regret. "Which way wilt thou have him faced?" asked the soldier bluntly. "Towards the temple," the pontiff replied. "In dying I would have him see the holy house hath not suffered by him." The workmen put their hands to the cross, and carried it, burden and all, to the place of planting. At a word they dropped the tree into the hole, and the body of the Nazarene also dropped heavily, and hung by the bleeding hands. Still no cry of pain, only the exclamation divinest of all recorded exclamations, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." The cross reared now above all other objects, and standing singly out against the sky was greeted with a burst of delight, and all who could see and read the writing upon the board over the Nazarene's head made haste to decipher it. Soon as read, the legend was adopted by them and communicated, and presently the whole mighty concourse was ringing the salutation from side to side, and repeating it with laughter and groans. "King of the Jews! Hail, King of the Jews!" The pontiff, with a clearer idea of the import of the inscription, protested against it, but in vain. So the titled king, looking from the knoll with dying eyes, must have had the city of his fathers at rest below him, she who had so ignominiously cast him out. The sun was rising rapidly to noon. The hills bared their brown breasts lovingly to it. The more distant mountains rejoiced in the purple with which it so regally dressed them. In the city, the temples, palaces, towers, pinnacles, and all points of beauty and prominence seemed to lift themselves into the unrivaled brilliance as if they knew the pride they were giving the many who from time to time turned to look at them. Suddenly a dimness began to fill the sky and cover the earth. At first no more than a scarce perceptible fading of the day, a twilight out of time, an evening gliding in upon the splendors of noon. But it deepened and directly drew attention, whereat the noise of the shouting and laughter fell off, and men, doubting their senses, gazed at each other curiously. Then they looked to the sun again, then at the mountains getting farther away, at the sky and the near landscape sinking in shadow, at the hill upon which the tragedy was enacting. And from all these they gazed at each other again, and turned pale, and held their peace. "It is only a mist or a passing cloud," Simonides said soothingly to Esther, who was alarmed. "It will brighten presently." Ben-Hur did not think so. "It is not a mist or a cloud," he said. "The spirits who live in the air, the prophets and saints, are at work at mercy to themselves and nature. I say to you, O Simonides, truly as God lives, he who hangs yonder is the Son of God." And leaving Simonides lost in wonder at such a speech from him, he went where Balthasar was kneeling nearby, and laid his hand upon the good man's shoulder. "O wise Egyptian, hearken. Thou alone wert right. The Nazarene is, indeed, the Son of God." Balthasar drew him down to him, and replied feebly, "I saw him as a child in the manger where he was first laid. It is not strange that I knew him sooner than thou, but oh, that I should live to see this day. Would I had died with my brethren, happy Melchior, happy Gaspar." "Comfort thee," said Ben-Hur. "Doubtless they too are here." The dimness went on, deepening into obscurity, and that into positive darkness, but without deterring the bolder spirits upon the knoll. One after the other the thieves were raised on their crosses, and the crosses planted. The guard was then withdrawn, and the people set free closed in upon the height, and surged up it like a converging wave. A man might take a look when a newcomer would push him on, and take his place to be in turn pushed on, and there were laughter and ribaldry and revilements, all for the Nazarene. "Ha, ha! If thou be the King of the Jews, save thyself!" a soldier shouted. "Aye," a priest said. "If he will come down to us now, we will believe in him." Others wagged their heads wisely, saying, "He would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, but he cannot save himself." Others still, "He called himself the Son of God. Let us see if God will save him." What all there is in prejudice no one has ever said. The Nazarene had never harmed the people. Far the greater part of them had never seen him, except in this his hour of calamity, yet singular contrariety. They loaded him with their curses and gave their sympathy to the thieves. The supernatural night, dropped thus from the heavens, affected Esther as it began to affect thousands of others braver and stronger. "Let us go home," she prayed twice, 3 times, saying, "It is the frown of God, Father. What other dreadful things may happen? Who can tell? I am afraid." Simonides was obstinate. He said little, but was plainly under great excitement, observing about the end of the first hour that the violence of the crowding up on the knoll was somewhat abated. At his suggestion the party advanced to take position nearer the crosses. Ben-Hur gave his arm to Balthasar, yet the Egyptian made the ascent with difficulty. From their new stand the Nazarene was imperfectly visible, appearing to them not more than a dark suspended figure. They could hear him, however, hear his sighing, which showed an endurance or exhaustion greater than that of his fellow sufferers, for they filled every lull in the noises with their groans and entreaties. The second hour after the suspension passed like the first one. To the Nazarene they were hours of insult, provocation, and slow dying. He spoke but once in the time. Some women came and knelt at the foot of his cross. Among them he recognized his mother with the beloved disciple. "Woman," he said, raising his voice, "behold thy son." And to the disciple, "Behold thy mother." The third hour came, and still the people surged round the hill, held to it by some strange attraction, with which, in probability, the night in midday had much to do. They were quieter than in the preceding hour, yet at intervals they could be heard off in the darkness, shouting to each other, multitude calling unto multitude. It was noticeable also that coming down to the Nazarene, they approached his cross in silence, took the look in silence, and so departed. This change extended even to the guard, who so shortly before had cast lots for the clothes of the crucified. They stood with their officers a little apart, more watchful on the one convict than of the throngs coming and going. If he but breathed heavily, or tossed his head in a paroxysm of pain, they were instantly on the alert. Most marvelous of all, however, was the altered behavior of the high priest and his following, the wise men who had assisted him in the trial in the night, and in the victim's face kept place by him with zealous approval. When the darkness began to fall, they began to lose their confidence. There were among them many learned in astronomy and familiar with the apparitions so terrible in those days to the masses. Much of the knowledge was descended to them from their fathers far back. Some of it had been brought away at the end of the captivity, and the necessities of the temple service kept it all bright. These closed together when the sun commenced to fade before their eyes, and the mountains and hills to recede. They drew together in a group around their pontiff and debated what they saw. "The moon is at its full," they said with truth, "and this cannot be an eclipse." Then, as no one could answer the question common with them all, as no one could account for the darkness, for its occurrence at that particular time, in their secret hearts they associated it with the Nazarene, and yielded to an alarm which the long continuance of the phenomenon steadily increased. In their place behind the soldiers, they noted every word and motion of the Nazarene, and hung with fear upon his sighs, and talked in whispers. The man might be the Messiah, and then... But they would wait and see. In the meantime, Ben-Hur was not once visited by the old spirit. The perfect peace abode with him. He prayed simply that the end might be hastened. He knew the condition of Simonides' mind, that he was hesitating on the verge of belief. He could see the massive face weighed down by solemn reflection. He noticed him casting inquiring glances at the sun, as seeking the cause of the darkness. Nor did he fail to notice the solicitude with which Esther clung to him, smothering her fears to accommodate his wishes. "Be not afraid," he heard him say to her, "but stay and watch with me. Thou mayest live twice the span of my life, and see nothing of human interest equal to this. And there may be revelations more. Let us stay to the close." When the third hour was about half gone, some men of the rudest class, wretches from the tombs about the city, came and stopped in front of the center cross. "This is he, the new king of the Jews," said one of them. The others cried with laughter, "Hail, all hail, King of the Jews!" Receiving no reply, they went closer. "If thou be the King of the Jews, or Son of God, come down," they said loudly. At this, one of the thieves quit groaning and called to the Nazarene, "Yes, if thou be the Christ, save thyself and us." The people laughed and applauded. Then, while they were listening for a reply, the other felon was heard to say to the first one, "Dost thou not fear God? We receive the due rewards of our deeds, but this man hath done nothing amiss." The bystanders were astonished. In the midst of the hush which ensued, the second felon spoke again, but this time to the Nazarene. "Lord," he said, "remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom." Simonides gave a great start. "When thou comest into thy kingdom?" It was the very point of doubt in his mind, the point he had so often debated with Balthasar. "Didst thou hear?" said Ben-Hur to him. "The kingdom cannot be of this world. Yon witness said the king is but going to his kingdom, and in effect I heard the same in my dream." "Hush," said Simonides more imperiously than ever before in speech to Ben-Hur. "Hush, I pray thee, if the Nazarene should answer." And as he spoke, the Nazarene did answer, in a clear voice full of confidence. "Verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise." Simonides waited to hear if that were all. Then he folded his hands and said, "No more, no more, Lord. The darkness is gone. I see with other eyes, even as Balthasar I see with eyes of perfect faith." The faithful servant had at last his fitting reward. His broken body might never be restored, nor was there riddance of the recollection of his sufferings, or recall of the years embittered by them. But suddenly a new life was shown him, with assurance that it was for him, a new life lying just beyond this one, and its name was Paradise. There he would find the kingdom of which he had been dreaming, and the king. A perfect peace fell upon him. Over the way in front of the cross, however, there were surprise and consternation. The cunning casuists there put the assumption underlying the question and the admission underlying the answer all together. For saying through the land that he was the Messiah, they had brought the Nazarene to the cross. And lo, on the cross, more confidently than ever, he had not only reasserted himself, but promised enjoyment of his paradise to the malefactor. They trembled at what they were doing. The pontiff, with all his pride, was afraid. Where got this man his confidence except from truth? And what should the truth be but God? A very little now would put them all to flight. The breathing of the Nazarene grew harder. His sighs became great gasps. Only 3 hours upon the cross, and he was dying. The intelligence was carried from man to man until everyone knew it, and then everything hushed. The breeze faltered and died. A stifling vapor loaded the air. Heat was superadded to darkness. Nor might anyone, unknowing the fact, have thought that Nor might anyone, unknowing the fact that Nor might anyone, unknowing the fact, have thought that off the hill, out under the overhanging pall, there were 3 millions of people waiting, awestruck. What should happen next? They were so still. Then there went out through the gloom, over the heads of such as were on the hill, within hearing of the dying man, a cry of despair, if not reproach. My God, why hast thou forsaken me?" The voice startled all who heard it. One it touched uncontrollably. The soldiers in coming had brought with them a vessel of wine and water, and set it down a little way from Ben-Hur. With a sponge dipped into the liquor, and put upon the end of a stick, they could moisten the tongue of a sufferer at their pleasure. Ben-Hur thought of the draught he had had at the well near Nazareth. An impulse seized him. Catching up the sponge, he dipped it into the vessel and started for the cross. "Let him be!" the people in the way shouted angrily. "Let him be!" Without minding them, he ran on and put the sponge to the Nazarene's lips. Too late! Too late! The face then plainly seen by Ben-Hur bruised and black with blood and dust as it was, lighted nevertheless with a sudden glow. The eyes opened wide and fixed upon someone visible to them, alone in the far heavens, and there were content and relief, even triumph in the shout the victim gave. "It is finished!" So a hero dying in the doing a great deed celebrates his success with a last cheer. The light in the eyes went out. Slowly the crowned head sank upon the laboring breast. Ben-Hur thought the struggle over, but the fainting soul recollected itself, so that he and those around him caught the other and last words spoken in a low voice, as if to one listening close by. "Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit." A tremor shook the tortured body. Then there was a scream of fiercest anguish, and the mission and the earthly life were over at once. The heart with all its love was broken, for of that, O reader, the man died. Ben-Hur went back to his friend, saying simply, "It is over. He is dead." In a space incredibly short, the multitude was informed of the circumstance. No one repeated it aloud. There was a murmur which spread from the knoll in every direction, a murmur that was little more than a whispering, "He is dead, he is dead," and that was all. The people had their wish. The Nazarene was dead, yet they stared at each other aghast. His blood was upon them. And while they stood staring at each other, the ground commenced to shake. Each man took hold of his neighbor to support himself. In a twinkling the darkness disappeared, and the sun came out, and everybody, as with the same glance, beheld the crosses upon the hill, all reeling drunken-like in the earthquake. They beheld all three of them, but the one in the center was arbitrary. It alone would be seen, and for that it seemed to extend itself upwards, and lift its burden, and swing it to and fro, higher and higher in the blue of the sky. And every man among them who had jeered at the Nazarene, everyone who had struck him, everyone who had voted to crucify him, everyone who had marched in the procession from the city, everyone who had in his heart wished him dead, and they were as 10 to 1, felt that he was in some way individually singled out from the many, and that if he would live, he must get away quickly and possible from that menace in the sky. They started to run. They ran with all their might. On horseback and camels and in chariots they ran, as well as on foot. But then, as if it were mad at them for what they had done, and had taken up the cause of the unoffending and friendless dead, the earthquake pursued them and tossed them about, and flung them down, and terrified them yet more by the horrible noise of great rocks grinding and rending beneath them. They beat their breasts and shrieked with fear. His blood was upon them. The homebred and the foreign priest and layman, beggar, Sadducee, Pharisee were overtaken in the race and tumbled about indiscriminately. If they called on the Lord, the outraged earth answered for him in fury, and dealt them all alike. It did not even know wherein the high priest was better than his guilty brethren. Overtaking him, it tripped him up also, and smirched the fringing of his robe, and filled the golden bells with sand, and his mouth was dust. He and his people were alike in the one thing at least: the blood of the Nazarene was upon them all. When the sunlight broke upon the crucifixion, the mother of the Nazarene, the disciple, and the faithful women of Galilee, the centurion and his soldiers, and Ben-Hur and his party were all who remained upon the hill. These had not time to observe the flight of the multitude. They were too loudly called upon to take care of themselves. "Seat thyself here," said Ben-Hur to Esther, making a place for her at his father's feet. "Now cover thine eyes, and look not up, but put thy trust in God and the spirit of yon just man so foully slain. "Nay," said Simonides reverently, "let us henceforth speak of him as the Christ." "Be it so," said Ben-Hur. Presently a wave of the earthquake struck the hill. The shrieks of the thieves upon the reeling crosses were terrible to hear. Though giddy with the movements of the ground, Ben-Hur had time to look at Balthazar, and beheld him prostrate and still. He ran to him and called. There was no reply. The good man was dead. Then Ben-Hur remembered to have heard a cry in answer, as it were, to the scream of the Nazarene in his last moment, but he had not looked to see from whom it had proceeded, and ever after he believed the spirit of the Egyptian accompanied that of his master over the boundary into the kingdom of paradise. The idea rested not only upon the cry heard, but upon the exceeding fitness of the distinction. If faith were worthy reward in the person of Gaspar, and love in that of Melchior, surely he should have some special meed who through a long life had so excellently illustrated the three virtues in combination: faith, love, and good works. The servants of Balthazar had deserted their master, but when all was over, the two Galileans bore the old man in his litter back to the city. It was a sorrowful procession that entered the south gate of the palace of the Hurs about the set of sun that memorable day. About the same hour the body of the Christ was taken down from the cross. The remains of Balthazar were carried to the guest chamber. All the servants hastened weeping to see him, for he had the love of every living thing with which he had in any wise to do. But when they beheld his face and the smile upon it, they dried their tears, saying, "It is well. He is happier this evening than when he went out in the morning." Ben-Hur would not trust a servant to inform Iris what had befallen her father. He went himself to see her and bring her to the body. He imagined her grief. She would now be alone in the world. It was a time to forgive and pity her. He remembered he had not asked why she was not of the party in the morning, or where she was. He remembered he had not thought of her, and from shame he was ready to make any amends, the more so as he was about to plunge her into such acute grief. He shook the curtains of her door, and though he heard the ringing of the little bells echoing within, he had no response. He called her name, and again he called. Still no answer. He drew the curtain aside and went into the room. She was not there. He ascended hastily to the roof in search of her, nor was she there. He questioned the servants. None of them had seen her during the day. After the long quest everywhere through the house, Ben-Hur returned to the guest chamber, and took the place by the dead, which should have been hers, and he bethought him there how merciful the Christ had been to his aged servant. He's saying the dead should have been hers, so the place that he was sitting should have been where she was sitting, but he took that place because she wasn't there. Not that she should have been the dead, which is what it could have. Anyway, all right. At the gate of the kingdom of paradise, happily, the afflictions of this life, even its desertions, are left behind and forgotten by those who go and rest. When the gloom of the burial was nigh gone, on the 9th day after the healing, the law being fulfilled, Ben-Hur brought his mother and Tirzah home, and from that day, in that house, the most sacred names possible of utterance by men were always coupled worshipfully together: God the Father and Christ the Son. About 5 years after the crucifixion, Esther, the wife of Ben-Hur, sat in her room in the beautiful villa by Misenum. It was noon, with the warm Italian sun making summer for the roses and vines outside. Everything in the apartment was Roman, except that Esther wore the garments of a Jewish matron. Tirzah and 2 children at play upon a lion's skin on the floor were her companions, and one had only to observe how carefully she watched them to know that the little ones were hers. Time had treated her generously. She was more than ever beautiful, and in becoming mistress of the villa she had realized one of her cherished dreams. In the midst of this simple, home-like scene, a servant appeared in the doorway and spoke to her. A woman in the atrium to speak with the mistress. Let her come. I will receive her here. Presently the stranger entered. At sight of her the Jewess arose and was about to speak. Then she hesitated, changed color, and finally drew back, saying, I have known you, good woman. You are... I was Iris, the daughter of Balthazar. Esther conquered her surprise and bade the servant bring the Egyptian a seat. No, said Iris coldly. I will retire directly. The two gazed at each other. We know what Esther presented, a beautiful woman, a happy mother, a contented wife. On the other side, it was very plain that fortune had not dealt so gently with her former rival. The tall figure remained with some of its grace, but an evil life had tainted the whole person. The face was coarse, the large eyes were red and pursed beneath the lower lids. There was no color in her cheeks. The lips were cynical and hard, and general neglect was leading rapidly to premature old age. Her attire was ill-chosen and draggled. The mud of the road clung to her sandals. Iris broke the painful silence. These are thy children? Esther looked at them and smiled. Yes. Will you not speak to them? I would scare them, Iris replied. Then she drew closer to Esther and, seeing her shrink, said, Be not afraid. Give thy husband a message for me. Tell him his enemy is dead, and that for the much misery he brought me, I slew him. His enemy? The Messala. Further, tell thy husband that for the harm I sought to do him, I have been punished until even he would pity me. Tears arose in Esther's eyes, and she was about to speak. Nay, said Iris, I do not want pity or tears. Tell him finally I have found that to be a Roman is to be a brute. Farewell. She moved to go. Esther followed her. Stay and see my husband. He has no feeling against you. He sought for you everywhere. He will be your friend. I will be your friend. We are Christians. The other was firm. No, I am what I am of choice. It will be over shortly. But, Esther hesitated. Have we nothing you would wish? Nothing to... The countenance of the Egyptian softened. Something like a smile played about her lips. She looked at the children upon the floor. There is something, she said. Esther followed her eyes, and with quick perception answered, It is yours. Iris went to them and knelt on the lion's skin and kissed them both. Rising slowly, she looked at them, then passed to the door and out of it without a parting word. She walked rapidly and was gone before Esther could decide what to do. Ben-Hur, when he was told of the visit, knew certainly what he had long surmised, that on the day of the crucifixion Iris had deserted her father for Messala. Nevertheless, he set out immediately and hunted for her vainly. They never saw her more or heard of her. The blue bay, with all its laughing under the sun, has yet its dark secrets. Had it a tongue, it might tell us of the Egyptian. Simonides lived to be a very old man. In the 10th year of Nero's reign, he gave up the business so long centered in his warehouse at Antioch. To the last, he kept a clear head and a good heart, and was successful. One evening in the year named, he sat in his armchair on the terrace of the warehouse. Ben-Hur and Esther and their 3 children were with him. The last of the ships swung at mooring in the current of the river. All the rest had been sold. In the long interval between this and the day of the crucifixion, but one sorrow had befallen them. That was when the mother of Ben-Hur died. And then and now their grief would have been greater but for their Christian faith. The ship spoken of had arrived only the day before, bringing intelligence of the persecution of Christians begun by Nero in Rome, and the party of on the terrace were talking of the news when Malach, who was still in their service, approached and delivered a package to Ben-Hur. Who brings this? The latter asked, after reading. An Arab. Where is he? He left immediately. Listen, said Ben-Hur to Simonides. He read them the following letter. I, Ilderim, the son of Ilderim the generous, and Sheik of the tribe of Ilderim, to Judah, son of Hur. Know, O friend of my father, how my father loved you. Read what is herewith sent, and you will know. His will is my will, therefore what he gave is thine. All the Parthians took from him in the great battle in which they slew him, I have retaken. This writing with other things, and vengeance, and all the brood of that Myra, who in his time was mother of so many stars. Peace be to you and all yours. The voice of the desert is the voice of Ilderim Sheik. Ben-Hur next unrolled a scrap of papyrus yellow as a withered mulberry leaf. It required the daintiest handling. Proceeding, he read, Ilderim, surnamed the generous, Sheik of the tribe of Ilderim, to the son who succeeds him. All I have, O son, shall be thine in the day of thy succession, except that property by Antioch known as the Orchard of Palms. And it shall be to the son of Hur, who brought us such glory in the circus, to him and his forever. Dishonor not thy father, Ilderim the generous, Sheik. What say you? Asked Ben-Hur of Simonides. Esther took the papers, pleased, and read them to herself. Simonides remained silent. His eyes were upon the ship, but he was thinking. At length he spoke. Son of Hur, he said gravely, the Lord has been good to you in these latter years. You have much to be thankful for. Is it not time to decide finally the meaning of the gift of the great fortune now all in your hand and growing? I decided that long ago. The fortune was meant for the service of the giver, not a part, Simonides, but all of it. The question with me has been, how can I make it most useful in his cause? And of that tell me, I pray you, Simonides answered. The great sums you have given to the church here in Antioch, I am witness to. Now, instantly almost, with this gift of the generous sheiks, comes the news of the persecution of the brethren in Rome. It is the opening of a new field. The light must not go out in the capital. Tell me, how can I keep it alive? I will tell you. The Romans, even this Nero, hold two things sacred. I know of no others they so hold. They are the ashes of the dead and all places of burial. If you cannot build temples for the worship of the Lord above ground, then build them below the ground, and to keep them from profanation, carry to them the bodies of all who die in the faith. Ben-Hur arose excitedly. It is a great idea, he said. I will not wait to begin it. Time forbids waiting. The ship that brought the news of the suffering of our brethren shall take me to Rome. I will sail tomorrow. He turned to Malach. Get the ship ready, Malach, and be thou ready to go with me. It is well, said Simonides. And thou, Esther, what sayest thou? Asked Ben-Hur. Esther came to his side and put her hand on his arm and answered, So wilt thou best serve the Christ? O my husband, let me not hinder, but go with thee and help. The end. And then there's a little cross right here on the page after the last page, and inside the cross it says, If any of my readers visiting Rome will make the short journey to the catacomb of San Calixto, which is more ancient than that of San Sebastiano, he will see what became of the fortune of Ben-Hur and give him thanks. Out of that vast tomb, Christianity issued to supersede the Caesars. And that is the end of Ben-Hur. There's an afterword, but it's about Lew Wallace, so that's not relevant to the story, but it would be cool to read sometime. So, I hope you enjoyed Ben-Hur. We are now complete. This is the 35th video in this series, and I hope you enjoy it. Like I said, like and share the playlist on YouTube. I can put a link to it in the description. The description later if you like. And God bless you. Have a good night. And we will see you next time. We are reading, I think we're going to start the third of the Anne McCaffrey series with Dragon Drums. So God bless you. Have a good night. And we'll see you again later. Goodbye.